Welcome to the Circle Unbroken, celebrating 40 years of community stewardship and the Givens Collection, an exhibit that celebrates the 40th anniversary of the Givens Collection of African American literature and life here at Elmer Anderson Library. This exhibit allows us an opportunity to celebrate and honor the elders and the ancestors that are responsible for having marshaled their resources some 40 years ago to make sure that this cultural treasure would be brought to the Twin Cities, kept safely for the community of researchers here on campus, but also the broader community off, demonstrating boundless creativity that African American writers have represented throughout this tradition of African American writing in the United States, but also the commitment that that community has made to making sure the collection is accessible. This exhibit, the structure of it, is in some ways inspired by another performance tradition, the ring shout. It is organized in a circle, a ring. You move counterclockwise through the exhibit, like the ring shout. This tradition of call and response between performer and ensemble is central to how the exhibit tells its story. So the ring shout, I should say, is a cultural phenomenon that is identified with Gullah Geechee people in Georgia and South Carolina, who, thanks to having been located on islands off the coast of the eastern seaboard, were able to retain a number of African cultural traditions. As you enter the gallery, you pass through a gate where there is a poem about the Sankofa bird, which the Akan of Ghana take as a symbol of representing a value system. Go back and get it. It is a bird with its beak pointed backwards toward the past, right? But its body is facing the future. And so with this exhibit, we go back to the early days of the collection some 40 years ago to try to understand who was there, what they were about, and what they would do ultimately with the collection. And then lastly, how people, researchers, artists of various sorts, students, teachers have responded to the collection. So the collection is in three sections. The first, a gathering of the circle, which honors individuals and a collection of forces who would come together under the leadership of Dr. John S. Wright, Professor Emeritus of African American Studies, my teacher, who is himself an alum of the University of Minnesota and was in 1969 a part of the Moral Hall takeover. John Wright drafted the list of demands that students who were at that time upset with university administration, who had in 1968, upon the students bringing grievances to the university in the wake of Dr. King's assassination. And what that list of demands included was bringing on a Black faculty at the university, courses in African American history, literature, which again did not exist up to that point. And so we count the coming of the Givens Collection to the university in 1985 as a part of the legacy of student activism in 1969, which John Wright was a central part of. And so the first case in the gathering of the circle honors John Wright. The second, the Patrons Council. 11 families, African American families, many of whom had been peers or contemporaries of John Wright, many of them university alums, who by 1985 were enterprising leaders in this community, who would put up the money to reimburse the university who had secured the collection. And then they organized and got involved in developing an organization that would help get the collection out into community, making it more accessible. The third case in the section, A Gathering of the Circle, tells the story of the Givens Family Foundation, who they were a central member of the Patrons Council, thanks to Roxanne Givens, Archie Givens Jr., and Carol Meshbesher Givens. And they were the largest contributor to the Patrons Council. The year after the collections having come here in 1985, there was an event on campus that would dedicate the collection in the honor of Archie Givens Sr., the man who is shown here, depicted here in this painting, a beloved member of the African American community, born in North Minneapolis in 1919, and would go on, even as an unlettered man, a person without a degree, to become the first Black millionaire in the state of Minnesota. And he was beloved again as a race leader, as the old expression goes, and who put, despite his not having had any degrees, education at the center of his community work. The dedication of the collection in honor of Archie Givens Sr. brought back to town writer, composer, photographer Gordon Parks, who had lived in the Twin Cities in the 20s or 30s. Mr. Parks came back as part of the dedication of the collection and is photographed here by Walter Griffin that night where the collection was dedicated. So this case tells the story of the Givens Foundation, who has been the leading partner with the Givens Collection, which again is part of University of Minnesota Libraries, Archives and Special Collections. What we have on display here in the case is an illuminated Bible, the Book of Moses, illustrated by Jacob Lawrence, the great modernist painter. So after a gathering of the circle, we have a section titled The Harmonies in Their Call, which describes what they did with the collection once it was here. John Wright, the patron circle of families, 11 families who put up the money for the collection, and the Givens Family Foundation would then develop a community advisory council that was dedicated to, again, thinking very strategically about how to get the collection out to people. And so the second section here, The Harmonies in Their Call, shows some of what they did, which includes republication or reprint series of older, historically significant works by African-American authors like Frederick Douglass, W.E.B. Du Bois, Arnold Bontemps, and Harriet Jacobs, under the Givens Collection brand, which was done in partnership with Washington Square Press, but then also a reprint series on the Black Arts Movement, an era that is poorly understood, perhaps because of how recent it is, having taken place during the 1960s and 70s. And so reprints of novels and poetry, short stories of writers of the Black Arts Movement, including William Melvin Kelly, Rosa Guy, and others. The other part of this next section of the collection also talks about the curriculum, how the Advisory Council, under the leadership of Dr. John S. Wright, would get busy with developing curriculum for pre-K through 12 teachers. This culminated in 1988 in the publication of the Givens Collection's Curriculum Guide, which advised and taught public school teachers on teaching African American literature. As a young student, in the early 90s at North High in North Minneapolis, what I could not have known at a school that was predominantly African-American in composition is that our teachers were coming to the University of Minnesota and taking courses with John Wright on subjects like the Harlem Renaissance in order to be able to come back and teach us. We took it for granted, but we couldn't have known that other people didn't know about the Harlem Renaissance like we were learning about it. And so the Givens Collection was used by the folks who gathered around it at the very beginning to start disseminating knowledge in the community, locally and nationally. So in addition to curriculum guides and reprints of historically significant works by African American authors, the Givens Foundation, working with the collection, would be responsible for perhaps the most popular event associated with the collection, and that is the NOMO African American Authors Series, which enlivened, right, by bringing living authors to campus for a public audience. Authors like Quincy Troop, Sonia Sanchez, Trisha Rose, Angela Davis, who would come and talk with writer Alex Pate about their works and about the broader significance of their works in the context of African American literary life. And this experiment with technology has led to a more recent Givens Foundation product, Black Market Reads, which this presentation is a part of. And so the Givens Family Foundation has been, again, the strongest partner to help develop programming around African American literature. This case features perhaps their most prized accomplishment, and that was an exhibit on the Harlem Renaissance, that great cultural phenomenon that happened at the early part of the 20th century, known most famously for its sort of activities in Harlem, but as we know, as the new Negro Renaissance was national, including activities here in Minneapolis. But the exhibit, A Stronger Soul Within a Finer Frame, would travel the United States for about 3 years and reach over 2 million people. We didn't know at North High that most people had never heard of the Harlem Renaissance. We got a dose of it. And this exhibit on the Harlem Renaissance, again, would reach over 2 million people. And now we know that the Harlem Renaissance is a standard subject of early 20th century courses in American literature. The last case in this section, The Harmonies in Their Call, features two projects of the Advisory Council. Ask Your Mama, 12 Moods for Jazz, which is an epic poem that Langston Hughes published in the 1960s and set to music, but was never performed anywhere until the 1990s, when John Wright, working with an ensemble here that was part of the Jazz Studies program led by Reginald Buckner, put the show on the road for a series of engagements, which culminated in a performance at Carnegie Hall. The second project in that case features a Black mystery writer symposium, which was hosted here at the University of Minnesota in 1996, and it was the first of its kind to gather the living Black mystery writers in the United States and to bring them together for a symposium here. And that features the correspondences related to the development of the conference, newspaper clippings, first edition works signed by the authors, a photograph of the group, and other ephemera and manuscripts that document the history of that event. So as we make our way around the circle counterclockwise, we land at the third section, the response. This section focuses on works produced by authors who use the Gibbons collection in the production of these new publications. Keith Byerman's The Art and Life of Clarence Major, which is a work of literary criticism and literary biography on the author Clarence Major, whose papers are a part of the Gibbons collection. That book is supported by materials from the Gibbons collection by Clarence Major. Rare books, signed manuscripts of a novel, a memoir, and sketchbooks, because Clarence Major, in addition to being a writer, is a painter. The second case in this section focuses around Hope in the Struggle, the memoirs of Josie R. Johnson, whose papers are a part of the Gibbons collection. So we have Hope in the Struggle, work that Ms. Johnson worked on with Carolyn Holbrook and Arleta Little of the Gibbons Foundation. Supporting that book are manuscripts of, in this case, Chapter 2, which is about her life at Fisk University, her dissertation from Fisk from the 1960s, a photograph of Ms. Johnson with the Board of Regents at the University of Minnesota in 1973, a stack of books from her personal collection, on most of which are on education and administration of public education. That was her focus, particularly as it related to the history of African-American youth and the family's role in educating African-American youth, and the effects of her time as a sorority woman, right? The last case in this section, the response, features two works: Blues Vision, which is an anthology of African-American writing from Minnesota, which bears a cover by our dear elder Tacumba Aiken, and then a second anthology, A Darker Wilderness, which is an anthology of African-American nature writing edited by Aaron Sharkey. Then supporting those two works are works from the collection that are either anthologized, historic works like Gordon Parks's A Choice of Weapons, his memoir, which is in part set in the Twin Cities, Taylor Gordon's Born to Be, a novel published by an author who lived in the Twin Cities during the Harlem Renaissance. And then there's works that authors like Alexis Pauline Gumbs consulted in her essay, which is included in A Darker Wilderness, and a web tool that the Gibbons collection helped develop thanks to the consultation of many writers in the community, including Aaron Sharkey, that web tool being Research African American History, which makes the collection and collections like it throughout the country, about 1,000, accessible to researchers through a search tool that is very much like Google, but is centered on African American history. It gives researchers access to digital archives throughout the country. So another feature, a central feature of the Ring Shout, in addition to it being based on call and response between leader and ensemble and moving counterclockwise and the singing of spirituals, there's often an elder at the center with a staff that they use to beat out the time that keeps everybody together. At the center of our circle is a staff, a 3-tiered case, which at its bottom features the artifactual evidence of the business of slavery, right, which this tradition is in part based on. We have a ledger from a plantation in Jamaica from 1834, a check in the amount of $1,400 for the purchase of one Negro slave and other materials related to, again, the business of slavery. Moving up one level, we have the beginnings of a prose tradition in African American letters, the slave narrative tradition. First edition of Frederick Douglass's My Bondage and My Freedom from 1855, a narrative of William Wells Brown, a fugitive slave from 1847, a first edition of Sojourner Truth's The Northern Slave, published in 1850, and then a more modern retelling of the experience of slavery that was taken down during the Great Depression. In this case, a page and a quarter by a woman named Colleen Brown, who was born in 1832. So by the time that slavery is ended, she's a grown woman and has a very vivid memory of the experience. And she tells her interviewer, those were terrible days. One level above, the top, features the muse for the show. The inspiration, major inspiration from the show, is the first work of African American literature to be published in book form. Phyllis Wheatley's Poems on Various Subjects, Religious and Moral, published in 1773 by an enslaved teenager, born in Africa, brought to America and enslaved at the age of 8 years old. And by the time she was 20, she masters English, Greek, Latin, English verse, becomes one of the country's most premier neoclassical poets, and the person who publishes the first book of African American literature. And this, our prized possession from the collection, again, the Black Madonna. All the rest you see here in the circle comes from this book as the watershed moment in a tradition of African American literature. Because it's the first publication, this is the beginning of a tradition of African American letters, which the Patrons Council, working with John Wright and the Givens Foundation, has taken up the business of carrying forward into the future for us. What I hope this exhibit demonstrates is continuity in the form of a circle, not a straight line. African people tend to think about time as a succession of circles, right? Not a straight line from here to there. Things return. We use the best from the past to move forward. But we are connected the whole time as a part of a tradition that is loving and caring and confrontational, right? It must confront the past in order to move healthfully into the future. Join us in that work. There is a great need to sustain that work under current threats posed today toward memory as it relates in particular to the legacy of slavery in the United States. We need everybody. I'm Davu Underwood Seru, curator of the Givens Collection. Congratulations to Black Market Reads on your 100th episode. You are the evidence, like this collection is the evidence. Let's keep going.